What is up, my Shadowverse soldiers, and welcome back to another Shadowverse Evolved video. Alright, soldiers, so the promised day has finally arrived. We are here in the combined sets of sets 12 and 13. So, we're only going to be talking about the set 13 deck because that's going to be what's going to be new. So, this kind of legendary that we are going to be rocking in this deck is going to be pretty versatile. And that's one of the key points that I want to make apparent in this video is that this legendary for this deck is going to be very versatile, and you're going to be seeing it in almost every deck. But of course, soldiers, go ahead and sit back, relax. Let's go ahead and figure out what deck we're going to be talking about in this episode of Inverse Academy. And alrighty, soldiers, so we are going to be talking about the Sekka deck. So in this video, we're going to be talking about straight Sekka things, and we'll talk about the other archetypes, of course, that you can include Sekka in, because as you can see in her traits on the bottom right here, she has a lot of traits, so she can be thrown into a lot of decks. Alright, and the thing about Sekka is she is very powerful with all these archetypes that are in her just character traits, and on top of her abilities on top of that, she can really do a lot in one turn. Okay, so before we get into the meat and bones of the deck, let's go ahead and talk about the pros and cons. Alright, so the first thing that I keep articulating, of course, for the first pro is that this deck is very versatile, or at least just the Sekka engine is very versatile, and you can put it in a lot of decks. And another neat thing about the Sekka deck is that it has Storm, and you can make Sekka a very big Storm follower so you can swing in for damage the very same turn. And then on top of that, we're going to be playing a little bit lower to the ground, so when we get into that mid-game turn, we're going to be seeing a whole bunch of followers on field, and we're going to have board spam. And then of course, neatly, if we're going to have a big giant board, that means we're going to be playing some followers for free. So of course, if we're going to be doing what Forcecraft wants to do and be hitting combo 3 and stuff like that, we're going to need free followers that we're playing. Alright, then moving over into the cons. So these are the things that I would consider are the things that are probably hurting the deck, or just kind of what make it fair, or just really just the downsides on playing this deck. Alright, so looking at our first point, we have Banish. So a couple of cards that we are going to be using is going to be banishing cards from our deck. So do be mindful when you're doing that, because if you have X amount of cards and you manage to banish your, final playset, you're going to be in a very weird position. Now, of course, most of the cards you will be banishing, of course, will be coming from Cemetery, but there are maybe 1 or 2 cards that are going to be banishing from your deck. Alright, so and then the next point, so if we're going to have a very big board, I think it's only fair that our followers aren't very big. So we do have a stat problem. Of course, we can put a whole bunch of followers on the field, but they're not going to have very big defense, so they're going to be removed very easily. So we're going to have to really threaten a whole bunch of followers on board so we can swing in for big damage when we go wide. Alright, the next up we have removal. So there are some removal pieces in the deck. Don't get me wrong, this deck doesn't have 0 removal, but there is some parts of removal where you're not really getting rid of the problem, you're just kind of stopping it for a turn. And sometimes we might honestly need that one more turn, but if we're not initially getting rid of the problem and they keep accumulating value from our unique removal, I would say, then, we're going to be in a very weird position. Alright, and then we have the RNG element. So of course, whenever we're playing card games, there's always a gamble, unless we're playing like a tier 1 or tier 0 deck that has a lot of consistency. Unfortunately with this deck, Sekka does have consistency, but seeing Sekka is the RNG element of it. Alright, so let's talk about our legendary Sekka finally. Alright, so we have Sekka Fate-Bound Fox. So she's a 1-cost 1/1. When she comes into play, you look at the top 3 cards of your deck. You may reveal a Forcecraft card that costs 2 or less from among them and add it to your hand. Put the rest of the bottom of your deck in any order. If you revealed a card, you discard a card. But she also has an activate ability for 3 play points to banish this card and 2 other cards from your cemetery, and then you may summon a Sekka Ninefold Blaze from your Evolved deck. And then looking at Sekka Ninefold Blaze, so she is a 3-cost 3/3. When she comes into play, you choose one. You can either 1, search your deck for a Resolve of the Nine-Tailed Fox and reveal it and add it to your hand, then shuffle, or you can 2, select a Resolve of the Nine-Tailed Fox in your cemetery and add it to your hand. Alright, so stopping right here to talk about the two legendaries here. So, not only on turn 1 are you able to look at the top 3 for any card that's 2 or less, which, let's be honest, there are a lot of Forcecraft cards that are 2 or less that really make decks function. So being able to look for any 2 or less cards so we can go into that next turn and then go ahead and play that card that we might have searched out, or use it for later on, of course. And then being able to discard a card, of course, which, you know, if you have a Resolve of the Nine-Tailed Fox, if we look at our advanced card here, we're able to get that card back. Alright, but let's go ahead and get back into the spell card. So it's a 1-cost spell card. You can choose up to 2. You can either 1, select a Sekka 9-foot blaze on your field, and if there are at least 9 cards in your banish zone, you give it +2/+2 in Storm. Or you can 2, select a follower with Sekka in its name on your field and an enemy follower in the field, and you give the first follower +2/+2 and deal the second follower damage equal to the first attack. Alright, so here's how I'm assuming the combo is going to work. So as early as turn 2, you're able to get the Resolve of the Nine-Tailed Fox. Go ahead and make Sekka a 3/3 on your turn, which is pretty amazing. Go ahead and swing in for some damage, and then you're also taking care of a follower that has either 3 or less defense, which I think is just good removal just in itself, just for the Sekka playline that we're looking at. And then on top of that, when Sekka is removed and she's in the cemetery, we can go ahead and spend 3 play points to get another follower out, and then that follower gets our spell card out. And if we have extra play points, we can go ahead and use our spell card. And if we have the 9 cards in our banish zone, we can turn this into a 5/5 with a Storm. Alright, soldiers, so you're probably wondering how exactly are we going to get 9 cards in the banish zone. So we have cards like this that are going to be pretty helpful when doing this. Alright, so for people who are looking for some good Storm damage, we have Edgy Elf, which is a 3-cost 2/2 and has Storm, and then has a strike ability to banish the top 3 cards of our deck to give this follower +1/+1. Alright, so I know not many people are playing Edgy Elf, but I will say if you're playing a little bit lower to the ground and your opponent isn't playing any cards, like they might be playing a little bit of control deck, being able to threaten in some Storm damage while they have no play points up is pretty vital. Alright, and then next up we have Spinaria, Keeper of the End. So she's a 5-cost 3/3. We can engage her to activate to banish 3 cards from her cemetery, to summon a Keen Edge artifact and a Mystic artifact token. Alright, so this card is honestly better because this card actually keeps us alive on turn 5. So not only do we get a Keen Edge artifact that's going to have Rush and Drain, we also have a Mystic artifact that has Ward that also allows us to draw a card, so we're able to be on the defensive as well. And just for you soldiers who are visual learners, here are what the artifacts are going to look like. We have a 5-cost Keen Edge artifact that's a 3/4 with Rush and Bane, so we'll be able to heal for 3. And then we have a Mystic artifact, which is a Ward that's a 2/3 that allows us to draw a card. Alright, so let's move on into some early game elements for the deck. And alright, before you soldiers start pelting me saying, Sparta, what are you doing running these crazy 1-cost cards? So, there are a lot of 1-cost cards that we're actually able to play being between Forcecraft and neutral. So you can kind of really splash in whatever flavor of 1-cost cards you really do want. You just really want your card to really do something. So being able for Lumbering Carpus to on combo 3, which is something that's going to happen a lot into this deck, being able to thinning your deck out by getting another 1-cost is honestly a card that I think is pretty solid in this deck. Alright, the next we have Cheshire Cat. So I think this card is actually pretty neato. Just being able to deal 2 damage to the enemy leader just in case this card wasn't put onto the field from hand is pretty vital, and especially if you manage to play this card for free. Alright, and then we have Fina. So Fina is just going to be the go card in this deck. Just being able to look at the top 5. If you didn't get Sekka on your turn 1, playing this turn 2 is going to be pretty vital because you need to go ahead and get that Sekka engine running, and then when you play Sekka, you're still going to be filtering and finding more cards, so that's even better. So playing Fina is going to be a must in this deck. Alright, and then we have Chipper Skipper. So worst case scenario, of course, right? You miss Sekka turn 1, you miss Fina turn 2, but you need to start building a board by turn 3. And the best thing about this is, you know, when we're looking at all these cards can be played off of Chipper Skipper. So being able to look at the top 4 to, you know, optimally get Fina so you can start looking for your Sekka. Just keep digging through your deck and keep finding things, which is what you're going to be doing a lot in this deck, is going to be pretty vital. And of course, to close out the early game, this is kind of what I'm meaning on your followers not having big defense, because this is really what's starting our early turns to start digging through our deck and finding stuff. But as you can see, a common occurrence with these followers, they have less than 2 defense. Alright, so before we start transitioning into the different archetypes you can run Sekka in, let's talk about the combo for the deck. Alright, so we have Elf Queen Abundant Life, and she came out in set 12. So she's a 2-cost 1/2. When she comes into play combo 3, you draw a card. Cool thing about Elf Queen is that she is searchable off of Sekka. Chipper Skipper can get her to play her for free. And then with the next card that we're going to talk about, there's a giant entire combo that we can really run. All right, and that next card we're going to be talking about is Spinaria Wavering Will. So she's a 3-cost 1/3, and she has this amazing ability of whenever a follower on your field evolves, give your leader +2 defense. But when she comes into play, select a Forestcraft follower that costs 2 or less in your cemetery, and put it into your EX area, and it costs 2 less to play this turn. All right, so optimally, we're just going to want to keep looping our Chipper Skipper so we can keep digging through our deck and finding 2 or less followers that we can play from the EX area. And of course, we have wonderful cards that we just looked at, like Elf of Queen Abundant Life, where we're actually able to heal 2 and draw a card in the same turn. Alright, so a card that I 100% slept on last set, which I didn't think was anything too crazy. Now, this Shamu Shama is a 1-cost 1/1 Storm follower that will threaten some damage. So if you go ahead and commit to the Sekka play, you still have 1 extra play point, of course, after doing everything that you've done probably. So you now have the Shamu Shama that's going to threaten at least 2 more extra damage. And on top of that, if you have any extra way to buffer with the next card we're going to be talking about, of course, then you're going to be threatening even more damage than that. All right, and then lastly, which, not everybody runs into their deck, but I do think is a good addition, we have Anastasia. So she's a nice 5-cost follower that when you do combo things, you get combo rewards. So being able to recover 2 play points and then giving your entire field +1/+1 once you get to combo 5 is just pretty vital, especially when you're going to be going wide. All right, so before we get into the archetype, let's actually start talking about some removal. Alright, so looking at Elf Queen Abundant Light Evo, so on Evolve you're actually able to choose 2 followers and deal 2 damage divided between them, which kinda isn't really too crazy, but on the combo 3, actually dividing 4 between 2 followers might definitely take care of 1 follower and then, weaken another. And of course that paired up with Spinaria, then we're able to heal 2 while also dealing damage to enemy followers. Alright, and then next up we have Alice Golden Afternoon. So this is a perfect, wonderful card to play off of Chipper Skipper. You can go ahead and play this, draw a card, move a follower off the field back into the EX area. So I think she does a lot for what the deck really wants to do, because sometimes you don't really need to take care of the problem, you just need to remove it. And especially if it's like a ward on the field and you need to go ahead and go for game, then this is the perfect card to be playing. Now do keep in mind, soldiers, that the card isn't taken care of, it's just pushed back. So if that follower actually is pretty big and accumulates a lot of value, then do be mindful when playing this card, because you're not getting rid of the problem, you're just pushing it back for a turn. So do keep that in mind when you go for it. Alright, so let's switch off into the archetypal type of deck. So let's start off with Beast. Alright, so in my opinion, soldiers, I really do like what Sekka does for the Beast archetype. So on turn 1, we can look for a card like Windflower Tiger to go ahead and play on our very next turn. Sekka manages to survive, of course, we can go ahead and swing in for 1 damage. We can play Windflower Tiger and then put Sekka back into our hand. We can go ahead and get Sylvia Panther into our hand, which is a nice storm follower that we threaten more damage with in the very next turn. And we're playing very low to the ground and we're swinging in for a lot of damage very quickly. And the amazing thing about all this is that these cards are pretty cheap to play in terms of tandem of comboing with them in the early turn. So of course, if you do the Windflower Tiger, you might want to have the extra play points so you can play Sylvia Panther if you have Sylvia Panther again. And you're just going to be returning beast followers back to your hand so you can accumulate more beasts. Alright, let's go over Sylvia Panther just in case you soldiers don't know what she does. So she's a 3-cost 3/2 with Storm, but this card costs 2 less to play if a beast follower not named Sylvia Panther was returned to hand from your field this turn. And you can also evolve her for 2. And then looking at her evolve, so she turns into a 4/3 and with Storm, and on evolve you select an enemy follower that costs 3 or less on the field and return it to its owner's hand. Alright, so of course you are going to be playing a little bit low to the ground, and let's be honest, that's kind of what the deck really wants to do, is play low to the ground, swing in for a lot of damage, threaten a lot of board presence so our opponent has to keep the removal up. But that is also the downside there, is that these followers do not have big defense. And lastly, let's talk about Deepwood Wolf. So it's a 7-cost 4/4 with Storm, and whenever another beast follower is put onto your field, you give this follower +2/+2. You can also activate for 1 play point to put this card from your hand into your EX area. Then you can select a card on your field and put it into its owner's EX area. Alright, so this is a nice little late game play to whenever you do play a whole bunch of beast followers in 1 turn, or if you want to go in for the second turn on your 10 play point play, if you manage to get all the way there, which, if you have 10 play points, you should be considering on the last legs of your life here. But with 7 play points, we do have Deepwood Wolf that can turn into a really big storm follower when we do have those play points in the beast deck. Alright, so moving on into Wasteland, I'm not going to talk about Wasteland too much because in the last set of videos we talked about every single Wasteland deck there was, honestly. But Wasteland is a deck that you can run with Sekka because Sekka is also a Wasteland follower. And the thing about her being a Wasteland follower is even on top of her spell cards being buffed, She can also be buffed from the Dutiful Steed and the Bullet Bike tokens, and of course, you know, the personal carrier, but come on, we don't really want to boost up their defense. We want to keep buffing up her attack so we can swing in for a lot of storm damage. Alright, so I do want to give an honorable mention to Carnbuckle Immortal Jewel. So this is a nice mid-game / late game play that you can do, and I think will keep you in the game by being able to heal you 4 and draw you 2 cards. You know, just give you that life that you need back in the mid-game where your opponent might have really scrambled you. So if you're having a hard time against your locals, having some terms of value, not being able to have your board swing in, then I think this is a nice card you should look into when building Sekka. Alright, so let's talk about some tech for the deck. Alright, so anyone who does play Force should know of this card just because it really just stops you from taking damage for that one instance. So if your opponent's going to swing in with a really big follower, which let's be honest, 7-cost dragon is a thing, and they're going to swing in for a lot of damage. So stopping that 10 damage for 1 turn might save us the game. And then for those people who want to still play low to the ground and make our followers that do have Storm a lot bigger, we do have Fashionista Nekla. Now Fashionista Nekla is kind of like a unique sort of play that some people might not be interested in just because her ability is on a combo 3 and you do get the 2-cost follower, and that combo 3 doesn't always come up when playing Fashionista Nekla because we're not going to have a full playset of her. But I do think if you want to swing in for like some really big damage and get some more damage in on your opponent, I would think about Fashionista Nekla. Alright, and then next up we have Orcus Puppet Girl. So you can run a playset of this card initially just to go ahead and get the Resolute Puppet so you can get the Lloyd token to just play a little bit defensively. I think this is a nice card to be running. Alright, and lastly we have Miriam Mutinous Being. So on evolve you bury another follower, summon a Keen Edge artifact token, and during your turn whenever a follower is put from your field into your cemetery, you can deal 1 damage to each enemy leader. So the cool thing about this is she checks for both her abilities. So you bury the follower, you deal 1 to the enemy leader, and then you summon that Keen Edge artifact token which has the rush and drain. So if the follower that you are attacking to has more than 4 attack, then the Keen Edge artifact checks itself, so being able to put into the cemetery to deal a total of 2 damage to the enemy leader while also healing yourself for 3. Alright soldiers, so we are finally moving into the grade of the deck. So of course, before we usually do this, we're going to go ahead and look at a couple of deck lists, one that I made, and then one that is provided on the Shadowverse Evolved website. Alright, so looking at an example deck list here, so we have the Beast archetype, so this is kind of what it's going to be a little bit lower to the ground. This has all the Storm options in it with the Shamu Shama, the Sekka archetype, and then the Sylvia Beast archetype, stuff like that. So I would say this is pretty consistent because most of the Beast followers kind of like find each other in a way and they kind of help you thin in your deck out. And if you manage to miss one kind of Beast follower, you can kind of like use Chipper Skipper to do something like that too. So I really do like that for this deck. Alright, and then here is my personal brew for the deck. So I'm not gonna lie to you, it's kind of like upsetting me that my 1-cost cards aren't on the top and it's not in numerical order, but that's okay. So I kind of went more of the Wasteland route because we can make our Sekka a little bit larger for like less play points. And I know Fashionista Nekla is an option that you can also look at into this deck, but being able to threaten at least 3 damage in the early game with Quixotic Adventurer just in case you do get it is pretty nice, or you can keep the Dutiful Steed into your EX area to use later on in the game. I also have Orcus Puppet Girl in this deck just because she came out in Seaside Memories. She's a little more accessible to use. Now the Evolve on the other hand might be a little bit harder, but on the other hand you do have the Elf Queen that you're able to adjust just in case you need to bump that up. I only do have it as a 1-of because I don't see it often when we're able to evolve her the same turn we play like Spinari or something like that, or even with Chipper Skipper when we manage to play her. So it's not going to be too often when we do get to evolve her because we're really only going to be playing her so we're able to draw a card. And of course, here's just my personal spin of it. Of course, I will be including the deck code in the description below so you can check that out personally for yourself. Alright, so getting back into the grade of the deck. So I will say that this deck does do a lot. The versatility of Sekka initially just bumps up the grade because it makes any Force Craft deck that wasn't playable pretty playable because you can just play her engine and then doing whatever the secondary engine of whatever archetype you might be playing in that deck, or it just seems like Sekka just kind of overloads on what her ability is and you only need to really include like X amount of cards. Alright, and on that note, I will be giving the Sekka deck an A+ just because there is a lot that this deck can do. Whatever archetype you do kind of run it in, it is pretty solid just because you're going to be going for the Sekka game plan, whatever you're going to be doing, because if you get the 9 banished cards into your banish zone, you do get a 5/5 with Storm, which only gets bigger if you have more of the spell cards. And alrighty soldiers, that pretty much wraps up the Sekka deck. If I missed anything, let me know in the comments below, because you know, I'm not an all-knower. I want this to be a good source for Shadowverse Evolve, and I'm very excited to see what sets 12 and 13 has for us. Alright, so some last minute updates, soldiers. So for the rest of this week, we'll be focusing on Forcecraft. How we're going to be doing Inverse Academy this time around is not, oh, okay, I'm doing Forcecraft. Then later on in this week, I'm going to be doing Swordcraft, and then moving on to other crafts. We're going to be doing by the weeks, of course, so this week is going to be Forcecraft, since there is going to be a lot of decks that did get updated. So we'll be posting Forcecraft decks for the rest of the week. And also, soldiers, Thanksgiving is coming up. I am thankful for all of you for rocking with me and watching my content. I want you to know that I love all of you, and I want to make sure that I'm bringing you the best Shadowverse Evolve content that I can with, you know, the resources and stuff I'm allowed to be able to see and everything. So I appreciate you all being very patient with me on all the stuff I may not know or I may already do know. But alright, soldiers, make sure you are safe in whatever you do tonight and safe whatever you do for the rest of the year. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.
Yeah, TRINN. Just to get you away. What I got to do, what I got to do. Just to get you away. What I got to do.